Welcome to NovoEDTalks, where we reveal real-world strategies and expert insights from learning and development professionals. In every episode, we chat with practitioners, course designers, learning strategists, and business leads. We hear about their experiences in the learning industry and predictions for the profession and the trends that they're seeing. But before we get started, a little bit about NovoEd. Founded at Stanford's Social Algorithms Lab in 2012, NovoEd is a people-centric, capability-building platform that combines social and collaborative learning to drive performance readiness at scale. Through cohort-based experiences centered around human interaction, NovoEd taps into collective wisdom, placing each learner at the center of perspective, application, and expertise. Large enterprises such as 3M, GE, Marriott International, and Nestle partner with NovoEd to accelerate their critical initiatives, reconnect teams, and achieve rapid alignment through learning that is felt, experienced, and swiftly transformed into impact. Now, let's meet our guest for today's episode.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of NovoEDTalks. Today, we have Bill Ryan with us. Bill is the founder and principal consultant of Ryan Consulting. So welcome, Bill. Why don't you start by introducing yourself, your role, and talking a little bit about your company?
Thanks so much for having me. 8.5 years at this point in time, as the calendar looks at us, working with organizations. I've been focused on kind of the learning application, the strategic use of learning to help organizations develop, engage, and retain their workers. I kind of specialize in more of the remote and virtual teams, which is kind of funny because I was doing this pre-COVID, and now people are finally having the same conversation I've been having with them, having led remote teams in my corporate world to life for many, many years. The idea of bringing people together and kind of blending and blurring time and distance is a way that I look at using learning strategically so that they can maximize, the organizational investment in both the technology, but also in their people.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. I'm sure you've got stories for days you could share with us, which I hope we're going to get into today. The more anecdotal stories you have for us today, Bill, the better. Now, this question is a little bit unique because, as you just mentioned, you've been kind of pushing this remote work and virtual collaboration concepts for a while, even before COVID. But with the rise of remote work and kind of virtual collaboration since COVID, how has your approach to learning and development adapted to ensure that employees are equipped with the necessary skills for the digital workforce? Or how have, you been doing that since before then, I guess we should say?
Well, it's interesting because my approach hasn't changed.
Yeah.
And this will come back to, I follow something called I call it 3 Ps. All right. It's purpose, people, and process. And whether you're in person, hybrid, or remote, the whole idea around this is that you have to kind of go from what the focus is. What do you want out of this investment of time that you're asking people to make? So, my approach has never changed from that. I've always been more focused on the idea that we have to be employee centric and not instructor centric. We have to kind of move from a seat-based mentality of attendance-based learning to more of a collaborative peer-to-peer opportunity where people have that interaction, where people get to build kind of solutions together. And from my perspective of like trying to enhance and develop people's broader competency sets, both their skills, the technical skills that they need to succeed, and the business behaviors that they use in the performance of that role, and allowing them to work in groups and then demonstrate them in a way that makes sense in that organizational structure. So, my approach is the same. I think what I'm seeing now finally is when we had to like all go home for a while, is suddenly the measurement of success was changing. And people started going, we don't want to, be lectured to via Zoom for 8 hours. And we don't want to be in meetings on Zoom for 8 hours. But what we want to do is create connections. And we want to look at, how do we really work? We'll work in small teams. So let's learn that way and kind of get to that point where people can, demonstrate their synthesis of the information that's being shared and the applications that are being learned and the concepts that are being brought forward, and let that become a application that they can then do in the real world of their job. So, I mean, I look at this as going, from my perspective, you know, we're actually the digital workplace is as you describe it was more of the it's work as we know it, and now we're just catching up to being able to learn within it in the same way that we work within it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. With that being said, how do you kind of, when you're working with folks, how do you identify and address different skill gaps within the organization? If you're looking at a group of learners, how do you kind of address what with each different group or whatever, or that they're working with? How do you kind of address how those skill gaps need to be filled, I guess?
I think it start with the end in mind. Big fan of working backwards. What do you want? How do you define success? Let me back up. Actually, it's how do you describe what success looks like going forward, and then how do you define it's how that success is measured, and then you start looking at what people already are doing successfully, and you find out there's the gaps. If I want them to be able to do a certain kind of task or connect with people at a certain way of set of behaviors, and I know that they're successful when they meet certain key performance indicators, you know, business operational metrics, and they're only at this level, then it's that gap in between that we now analyze to say, oh, you can do 6 out of the 10 things that we want in our future state. So let's find the other 4, and that's that's how we fill in the gap. But the key part comes into is you got to describe what you want going forward, that success that is there, and then you have to define the metrics.
Yeah. Why don't you speak a little bit to that? When you're working, are all metrics the same for every organization that you work with? Or I think I know the answer to that, but I'm baiting you here. How do you kind of define what those kind of KPIs are going to be for an organization? Or obviously you're working together with folks, but what do you look at to say something's successful or not?
Well, and I'm laughing, as you could tell. I mean, I have a little bit of a bad attitude, so let me be transparent up front. In my prior life in the chief learning officer role, I was, I had the traditional metrics, how many clicks and how many courses and how many people. And what I realized over time was none of that really mattered. Even scores. I mean, they're great from a curriculum perspective, to make sure that we're aligned in that regard, and test questions are accurate and effective and valid and reliable. But when it comes to actually showing the return on learning, this is when when I work with clients, that's the first thing I talk about is how are we going to show that we made a difference, that the solution implemented was a positive impact to your organization, that there is a return on learning. And that's when we start, for me, I go say, let's go talk to the operational business partners, the people that we're going to actually have to be involved in the solution is going to affect. So it's whatever their operational metrics are. A lot of times when I work with some of my clients, they look at saying, well, we have to make a dashboard. And I usually go, no, the only dashboard that we really need is the one that the business partners come back and tell us what the dollar value was that this learning solution or performance solution changed. Did we save time? Did we reduce injuries? Did we reduce waste? Did we increase sales? Did we improve call resolution? Did we get renewals? Those are the things that the business cares about. So, and the good news is that our business partners already have those metrics, behind. So we have a benchmark to measure against already, and they've already placed dollar figures on it. So we know what the change is. And if it isn't going right, we'll know immediately so we can go in and fix even quicker.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I love that. And I love that it's like a case, by case basis, because I think it's different for different organizations, but I mean, obviously always coming down to kind of the dollar and the time aspect of it. But, sometimes I think it's like, people want to see something more focused on one thing versus another. So I think that's great. Can you share, do you have any kind of like anecdotal stories that you can share about successes, or about specific like learning? And this can even be from like your time prior, as a chief learning officer, but, examples of, learning and development initiatives that, you were there was something very unique about it. And it was very clear that like impacted the KPIs in a positive way.
Within the last year, I worked with a partner group, and I was brought in to work with them for one of their clients. It was a nonprofit high tech company, and they had decided, because they were nonprofits, their salaries weren't as high as some commercial areas, and they were high tech, so their people were in demand. So they had decided that they wanted to use learning as a retention tool, and their CEO had kind of made that good. So they had come out and said, well, they didn't really have a big learning group at that point in time, and they reached out, and my partner came back and had said, let's have a conversation. And I had the good fortune to work with a very open-minded client group, and was able to have this conversation about, what would that look like? Again, what does success look like? How do we measure it? But the best part about it was that, this was kind of the CEO's driver, but we kind of pushed back a little bit and said, are you sure that, what you're convinced about, what they want, these people on your, organizational structure, is what they really want? And to their credit, they went, well, we think so. And I was able to have the opportunity to go talk to people, and across the board, vertically, horizontally, and come to find out that, this highly technical group really wanted more, about more investment in learning how others worked. They wanted to know how to communicate better on their own teams. They wanted to know how to communicate and work with other groups. They wanted to know how their work impacted, downstream and upstream of where they were in the organization, that they could make the process better. They wanted to know how to be better leaders, and how to lead people, in more than projects. And yes, there was some level of skills that were desired, but I was, fascinated to come back, and from that I was able to craft kind of more of a strategic plan that said, here's how we engage the hearts and the minds, to drive that retention effort. But it's really structured on the idea that we're engaging these people to do something that they had said, we want to do this, and I was able to be fortunate enough to listen to them and hear that, and let them, kind of help me drive this boat. They could come back to them and say, okay, here's how we're going to develop people. Here's how we're going to develop teams. Here's how we're going to grow, so that we can do work, better, faster, and have fun at it in its own way too, while we still learn and still are productive. And to me, that was, uh, uh, it was an amazing opportunity to see that if you just sometimes take the time to ask people, the return on that is huge, because the, intrinsic value now is transferred back to that community, and they now have the ability to kind of take charge, and that becomes, a very, very powerful, and very, you can sense it, you can feel it.
Yeah.
And it still is one of those. I'm still writing the good vibes from handing this plan, and the application plan into the client group, and knowing that they were so excited, and hearing the feedback later on of this is a good plan. So I'm still writing the good vibes.
That's awesome. That's great. And what a great, like, I feel like full circle kind of experience in just like learning and development, and that you're actually like learning from who you're going to be teaching to, it's kind of like a full circle thing, which I feel like is an awesome experience. What role does technology play in some of these like L&D programs that you're working with or seeing? And like, how do you see these folks like leveraging different tools and platforms to enhance learning and development experiences for employees?
Well, for me, having led remote teams and been on remote teams for decades, which was kind of, interesting. It was exception at the time, but now it's become the norm. So technology has always played kind of a key part. And I say that with, one caveat is that no matter what the platform or the tools are, the intentional design still matters more. The tools will change. Once upon a time we had, little videos, and now we have full screen, and we only had conference calls, and now we have Zoom and other tools like it. And I think, now we're seeing generative AI platforms and machine learning coming into the play of creating more personalized learning paths. So the platforms and the tools and the tech will continually change, but the intentional design of what we want people to be able to utilize in support of their role and support of their work, to help them at the place and time of their need hasn't changed. That is learning how to utilize the skills or the technology that's in place so that they can enhance their skills. Sometimes when I work with clients, one of the key things I do is have a pause and say, what do you already have in place? And for me, one of my a case study for me was I was hired to bring to by a large insurance company to come in and work within and set up their distance learning program. And they were just kind of getting up off the ground. But interestingly enough, we had pitched, they didn't have a learning management system at the time. And I pitched it and they said no. Um, and there was a whole story behind it. But what I did was, in the meantime of that initial pitch, I found a business partner and I found a course management system and discovered that within this company, they already had a content repository that they were using for their policies and procedures that could be used across all the call centers. And it would house all kinds of objects. So, I took a very inexpensive course management system that an internal client needed, married it to the internally already bought and paid for content management system, stored all kinds of things there. And out of that, we had a full blown, learning content management system that was, up and running very quickly. Years later, somebody came back and said, how did you arrange to do that? And I went, it's learning what you have and leveraging it.
Yeah.
The intentional use of design, though, was the same. And I think that's kind of the biggest thing is that, figure out what you got, and if you need something, okay, find out how it fits, but be intentional in trying to drive what that success that you're striving for is, and see how you can reach it that way.
Sure. Yeah, I love that. As L&D programs have rapidly evolved over the past 5 years, and platforms at that, what are maybe some key takeaways you've seen either with the technologies that have evolved or with the way people are using them?
For me, it's the focus on people has come back. I would say that over the last 3 to 4 years, I've seen a renewed focus on people, and that leadership is shifting. The role of leader has returned, I think, back to leading people versus managing projects that people are tasked to do. I'm seeing some of the key takeaways for me has been watching leaders learn to listen again,
Yeah.
to act with compassion, to have empathy, and yet still have accountability. But building their relationships, I think, has been one of the drivers that I'm seeing a renewed shift on. Because if we want to keep the people, that are the skilled talent we talk about, you've got to engage, and you've got to engage hearts and minds. And to do that, you have to have a connection. You have to have a relationship. You have to be clear. You have to be transparent in terms of expectations. You have to communicate, and then communicate some more, because at that point in time, you can have, trust, and you can start building, the kind of resilience that you want teams to have, because all those things together, impact, the success of a team's performance, of an individual's performance. So I look at, learning development in terms of the humanistic impacts that are coming together. So from a designer's perspective, how do we provoke conversations, especially online? How do we create connections so that peer-to-peer learning can take place? How do we look at learning from a group together, a cohort, like a work team does normally? And how do we create that as a learning experience that can then be taken and transferred back into the workplace? So, to me, it's taking those kind of humanistic needs that we have clarified again, and brought them back into the learning experience that rather seamlessly translates back into the work experience.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's so important with everything that, we get so busy sometimes with like everything. And it's like, oh, all these tasks have to be done. All these jobs have to be done. Like, blah, blah, blah. We often like, if you ask yourself, when was the last time I asked like how this person's like, day had been, or what, like how was their weekend? And like actually mean it, like, oh, last week you said you were going to do this weekend. Like, how did that go? And just like remembering that, like, or like having those little like bits of humanism, throughout your like day, I feel like are so important. So, I think that's great and a great observation. Looking forward, obviously, hopefully carrying this into the future, but what other kind of like trends or emerging technologies do you believe will kind of shape the way organizations invest in learning and development for, overall organizational growth?
I'm actually starting to see a little bit of a shift, back to this, what we described a little bit earlier, measure what matters to the business,
Mhm.
uh, and operational metrics. Now, um, I'm going to say that from a learning perspective, but I think if we, let's go up even higher. I think we're looking at it from the discussions that are centering on people, coming return to the office efforts, and some of the challenges that many leaders and companies are facing. Because it comes down to is, what are you measuring?
Mhm.
So I'm seeing more, tell me what you want and when you want it and how you're going to know it's successful, versus I'm going to sit here for 8 hours. So I see some of those operational metrics, kind of filtering down into the workplace, and also, into that whole learning space we have. So I see some of that kind of going into that, those integrated kind of tools and platforms that go into that place, into that situation, from a work and learning perspective. Some of the other trends, are certainly, generative AI, but the blend with machine learning. And I look at that from the ability to start creating deeper, more personalized support to people at the time and place of need. And that could be from, just a job aid to kind of a workflow learning moment where you're going to take a little time to dive deeper, to be assessed, to be given remediation. I think we're going to see the tools that are now able to start creating that more guided response to help people perform at a higher level, right away, versus having to take people off of a floor or a line to upskill or train. I think we're going to see more of those kind of generative AI, machine learning platforms come into helping guide and let people perform at a higher rate. With that, though, I'm starting to watch how social and collaborative learning tools and platforms are blending into these generative AI platforms. Let's take chatbot, and suddenly, the chatbot says, "Ooh, I've reached my level of capability, and this is my automatic flag to tag someone to actually have a conversation with people." And I think this is I'm wondering, as I cast my eyes into the crystal ball, I start seeing more collaborative communities coming together. over, specific job skills or performance needs, and how that kind of plays out. So I'm kind of interested to see how we've gone in 1 year, for introduction of ChatGPT. They just had their 1 year birthday, but all the other platforms that are out there, there's a website that I kind of watched that has over 600 AI platforms and tools. And we say there's an app for that. Now there's an AI for that.
Exactly.
And and I think that's going to be, it's not this all-encompassing answer. I think it's going to become, smaller chunks that are more focused, and that kind of provides that kind of personalized, specific support mechanism. So I'm kind of watching how that goes. And the last thing I kind of, I'm watching, refers back to this more humanistic approach of work. We used to talk about, there's a work-life balance, and what we really learned is no, there's life, and we work in it. So I look at how companies and organizations are going to try to blend that quality of work, quality of life, where hybrid and remote work is going to come into play. How do we handle fairness and equity, and embrace the diverse sets of needs and skills and people that make strengths, that come together across time and distance. And a part of that's going to be how, we define, what matters. So moving measurement towards performance rather than attendance, and then how we work together as people, as humans first, and workers second. I think that'll be kind of those are my broad sets of, next year, let's watch this.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think that's so true about AI. I was actually talking with a friend of mine who runs a software development company, and we were talking about just like AI, and he was talking about all of the, like, everyone thinks of it as like this like very like high level thing, but if you break it down into these little, like, these smaller companies that are just doing like one little thing with AI and like understanding like how cool and helpful that is. I think that's like missed a lot. Everyone's only seen like the big headlines of like, oh, robots are taking over, something like that, and I think that sends people like spiraling. And it's like I think like the little parts of it that are going to start coming out of that, and we're going to start seeing as more useful, will get like more incorporated into work and learning because of it. Not just like, hey, we're not saying like someone's going to write an entire course with like ChatGPT. Like, that's not what we're saying, when we talk about incorporating AI into learning and development, So I think that's great. I love those. And then I guess as a last question and a kind of fun send off, what advice would you give to someone new stepping into a leadership role?
Uh, um, Learn to listen, model, and then model curiosity. I there's been talk for a long time about, a learning culture, and I've kind of given up on it.
Mhm.
I've moved toward, um, if you can model a curious culture, and ask people questions, if you hear them, listen to them, turn their concerns into questions, and say, how will we do this? What would you suggest? What is a path forward? What opportunities could we look at? And you do that by creating those connections, creating those relationships, building that kind of network. But if you can turn those into, supporting that curiosity, people will come back with innovative, productive solutions, and they'll be learning along the way how to do things. It happens just as a natural byproduct. Look at any kid.
Yeah.
Let them ask why, and say, I don't know, how would you do it? And watch them figure it out, and learn, so they don't have to ask again. I think as a leader, that's the biggest thing is, model that curiosity, listen, try to get rid of the barriers for people. Yes, help them build connections, especially for the hybrid and remote people. I think that's going to be a key thing, is to be intentional about helping build networks, build those connections, and establish that kind of broader business acumen that as a leader you can open the doors. But I think those are all the kind of things that, as a new leader, I would look at.
Great. And I'll also take that as advice as a new mother. So anyway, thank you very much for joining us today, Bill. We appreciate it. And thank you everyone for listening in to another episode of NovoEDTalks. We hope you'll tune in again.